guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Sonnet, the owner and creator behind Sonnet's Garden Blooms, and in today's video, it is the IOD release. So I picked a few items out of the release and I am upcycling or flipping a few of my thrift store treasures. Stick around and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think. The first thing that caught my eye out of this IOD release were these gilded transfers. Honestly, I got so excited. It made me think right away of the holidays. I see that they have it paired with black, but I definitely want to test these on some different colors. But look at these. There is so much beautiful inspiration here. Oh, you could put these on anything. Oh, that big one. I cannot wait to use that. And I like how some of them look like labels. There's a lot of font in the background right next to each of these images. I like how they've used the entire space. So it's not wasted. There's not wasted gold in between. I really like that. So even if you just want to use one of the labels, you can still use all that writing on other projects. For project one, recently I volunteered at my daughter's softball game in the concessions. One thing they sold were giant pickles, and they had all these jars there. I couldn't pass them up, so I asked if I could take 3 because I knew I wanted to use them in a future upcycle. So in today's project, what we're going to do is we are painting one little black dress, one farm fresh, and one marquee from DIY. If you have yet to use DIY paint, it is amazing. It can be painted on virtually any object with very little prep, and glass is one of them. So here I am going to apply 2 even coats of all 3 colors to each jar, and I am going to let them dry very thoroughly in between coats. I definitely wanted to try this transfer on different colors and see how well it popped. I mean, obviously on the front cover, it pops amazing on black, but I thought about the holidays right away, so I thought marquee would be an amazing color to test this on. So again, I'm applying 2 even coats on this jar, and we're gonna let it dry as well. The other color that I really love using for the holidays is Farm Fresh. And again, I wanted to pick a color. I thought about picking green, but then I'm like, no, I want to see how these pop off of like a Farm Fresh blue. So I am going to test that color as well. Before I apply the transfer, I am going to seal all 3 jars. I'm using Big Top from DIY. Anytime you use DIY paint, it does need to be sealed because it can be reactivated with water. Also, a recommendation from IOD is that you do seal your paint prior to applying a transfer. And especially since these gilded gold transfers were new, I didn't want to experiment at all. I do know that there are other stockists that don't apply a clear coat prior to applying the transfer, but again, IOD does recommend it. After looking through this transfer, I decided on 3 very large images because the jars were very large. What I'm doing as well is cutting away how I mentioned there was font in between those images. I'm cutting that away because I want to use that on a future project. Another pro tip for everyone, make sure your project is completely dry before you apply a transfer. And this is even the regular transfers. Ask me how I know. I sometimes get extremely excited and I want to apply my transfer right away or quicker, faster, sooner. Sometimes it's best to let your project dry overnight to really ensure that your top coat is completely dry. The second pro tip that I discovered while using the gilded transfer, Make sure that your transfer stick is flat. Don't tip it and kind of make like a point on one end because what that does actually, you can kind of scratch the regular gold part and you can make some lines. And I did that on the black one, so I learned right away on this first application what not to do. But other than that, it is identical to applying a standard transfer. You peel off the back, you lay it down, start on one side and rub, and then if some of it doesn't, go down, just lay it right back down, rub a little bit more, and continue on. And you guys, these are so amazing. After this first one, I was a little nervous because I'm like, is this going to be different? Or, because it was the first time that I've worked with like a gilded gold transfer. It is amazing. I love it on the black, and now let's take a look to see what it's going to look like on Farm Fresh, which is a blue. Initially, when I laid it down, I didn't know if I was going to love it, and after I get the transfer on, I do, you guys. I think these gilded gold transfers can be put on virtually any color and look outstanding. Now on to Marquee, and this one I was most excited about because with the holidays coming, I know we're in July and I'm already thinking about the holidays, but that is how my brain starts working. I'm starting to prep for futuristic projects for my booths, and right away I laid it down and I'm like, this is gonna look so good. And again, I just start on one side and I work my way over. I felt like the jars were missing something, and then I thought maybe I should have added some of that additional font around it. I think I possibly could. I may go back and do that, but Fusion has a metallic gold paint, and I decided to just add a strip of gold around the edge or the rim. And the minute I laid down that first brush stroke, I'm like, this is it. This is what this jar needed. So what I did is I applied one even coat. I let all 3 jars dry, went back and I added a second coat of that gold metallic paint, and it was perfect. I loved it, and I think it just tied the whole piece together, and I think I will be going back and adding just some of that other, like lettering around the label, and I think that that's going to really bring it all together. The last thing I decided to do on this project was add a piece of this gold rope. Just brought it around, tied a couple knots, and cut it off, and I just frayed the edges a bit, and I think this really looks good. I am also going to put some greenery in here. I just think these are going to look great in either a vignette within my booth. I could use them outside. I can use them in a tablescape. They're amazing. For project 2, I had this frame lying around from another thrift haul, and after you get done using your gold gilded transfer, you have this extra piece of transfer sheet left over. I took a scissors, I cut it all out, and it fit perfectly in this frame. So we are going to flip this frame with that transfer piece. First thing I'm going to do is use Little Black Dress from DIY, and I am going to apply just one even coat over the entire piece. Initially, I was going to leave that gold rim, and it was too hard to try to cut in with that, and I could not take off the back or the actual painting itself, so I just painted the whole entire thing black. After it dried, I'm using Big Top, and for starters, what I'm doing is applying just an even coat of Big Top to the inside. I'm then taking the leftover transfer piece and I am going to lay it down and get it exactly where I want it. Once I do that, then I'm going to take more Big Top and I am going to put it over the top, and that will seal it right in. So I have not wasted any portion of this transfer. So I was able to use the gold foil on the jar. This was the leftover piece, and then I was able to use that in a frame. So I think there's a lot of applications where you can use this. You can create so many different things with the leftover pieces of transfer. After the entire piece has dried, I am now going in with Fusion's metallic paint called Gold, and I am adding a strip of gold around the entire interior of the frame. And honestly, you guys, I think just this little touch brings the whole piece together. It just ties it all together, and I love Fusion's metallic paints. For project 3, while I was out thrifting with Connie from The Painted Photographer, I found 4 of these frames. I loved the shape and the detail on the frame, and there used to be this company called Olin Mills, and they would take photos of couples. I don't know if it was through like a church, but then when 2 of them were out of the boxes, and when I opened up the boxes, there was actually images of a couple in the other frames. So I decided I was going to remove their images, and I'm tracing around just an old vintage piece of book page, and I'm going to cut it out, and that is going to be the base or the background of my project. I'm using fairy tale florals for this project. So I'm opening it up and I start looking through the entire transfer set, and I'm trying to imagine which one of these transfers do I want to use in my frame. And there are so many beautiful images on here, and I kept stopping and trying to envision like which one would be perfect. I really like that like purplish blue colored one. And then I ended up flipping to the next page, and then that is when I settled on this one, you guys, that purple. I just knew I wanted something purple in there, and that is the one that I settled on. What I'm doing here is I'm cutting out the transfer, but what I'm also doing is just leaving a little strip so that the top and bottom are still connected. I love using the IOD envelopes to hold my transfers, but I have an order in right now, and if I would cut that apart, I do take the chance of losing some of the transfer. I'm now lining it up and trying to figure out how I want to position this transfer on this paper. And I finally figure it out. And basically, it's the same as applying it to any other project. Lay it down, rub it on, and then take your transfer stick and start on one side and then work your way down. And really, it is that easy, guys. I decided that I wanted to add a bit of color to the actual frame. I'm using French millinery from DIY. It's this really pretty pale purple, and I thought it would pull out the purple in the transfer. I'm applying just one even coat of the DIY paint to the entire frame. Going to let that dry, and then we're going to come back. I'm going to do a little wet distressing on it and a little waxing. Because DIY paint can be reactivated with water, it is very easy to wet distress. So I just take a damp rag and I rub over all the raised areas where I want a little bit of distressing. And really, this is the easiest way. You have more control and you eliminate a lot of dust. So rather than using like a piece of sandpaper, wet distressing is like definitely my go-to. Now I wanted to add a bit of black wax to this, and this is where I made a mistake. Normally I go in with a clear wax first, then I apply a dark wax or a colored wax because it gives you more control. And I'm like, oh, darn, I forgot to add the clear wax. And I could have probably added a bit now. So I've already done it. I thought, well, I'm going all in. I'm just going to add the black wax everywhere. And I then take an extra piece of paper towel and wipe away the extra. I had really envisioned it being a little bit lighter than how dark purple it was, but overall, I'm still very satisfied with how this turned out. The last thing that I did is after I got done waxing it, I did go ahead and put the picture into the frame, and then I took my staple gun and I stapled the back into it to hold it all together. For project 4, I am using fairy tale florals for this project because I wanted to apply a transfer to a mirror, and I thought this would be absolutely perfect for that. I am determining which one I am going to use, and I wanted it to be substantial enough, and initially I chose 2 individuals, and then after I started painting and brainstorming how I wanted to apply it, I completely changed my mind and went with just a single transfer. Here is the mirror, and it is green. I initially thought, should I leave it? And then I decided I wanted to add a little bit of color. So what I'm doing initially here is I'm pulling out the glass so I can paint the frame. I am using Little Black Dress from DIY Paint. I'm just going to apply one even coat to the entire frame. I just felt like the black of the frame would really make a transfer pop off of the mirror. Then I got the idea that maybe I should have a little bit of the green popping through here and there, so I decided to just wet distress just on some of the raised edges. Most of the transfers have a bit of green from the leaves, so I thought that would tie in really well. Next, I am sealing the frame with Big Top. I want to seal it before I put the mirror back in. Plus, my inspiration or my vision for this is that I wanted to have the transfer be partly on the mirror and partly on the frame. But again, as this project was, coming together, my vision definitely changed. I went from having 2 transfers down to 1. So here are the first 2 transfers that I had thought I would use. And then as I was positioning them, I just didn't like how it was looking. I had an idea or like a vision of how I wanted it, and I just could not get the transfers to work. So I scratched this idea and went back to the drawing board. That's when I settled on this one. I thought it would fit perfectly right in the center of the mirror, and I liked how some of the leaves were like kind of wispy. It was perfect. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting away some of the excess of that transfer backing. That way I can lay it down and really figure out how I want it to apply the transfer. Once I figured that out, I pull off that backing and lay it down, and I apply it just like I would on any other project. I start on one side with my transfer stick and I just start rubbing. And again, I just start peeling it back and rubbing. The only difference is I do burnish it really well onto the mirror, but I do not seal it. And I think that a top coat on the mirror would possibly cause it to get a little hazy. And then what if at any point I want to remove the transfer? I can still do that on the mirror. So in case in the future I decide that I want to do something else with the mirror, I can remove the transfer and nothing is permanent. For Project 5, this is the new set of stamps called Ephemeral Type. And you guys, when I saw this, I squealed a little bit. I love all different fonts and backgrounds. You guys, if you have been following me for a while, you'll know I love like Kindest Regards, Le Courier. I love layering. And when I saw this, I knew it was probably going to be one of my new go-tos. When you do get a new set of stamps, you do have to season it. And I just get a really fine grit sandpaper and I rub the sandpaper over the entire stamp set. You are not hurting your stamp set at all. You are helping it. That way, ink will actually work better with it because you're seasoning it. So like I said, I just rub it all over and then wipe it down and it is set to go. On a recent live, I painted this train case and I used coal black. I painted it all black. Then I let it dry, came back and I used Sweet Pickens milk paint in sweet potato and I put that on. Then I sealed it with the dark oil wax from Sweet Pickens. I was a little concerned at first, like, can I stamp on this? Will it work? And it did. I am going to take this chunk of stamp right there. I'm going to stamp that on the front. I'm using IOD's permanent black ink, so I am not going to even take it off of the backing. What I'm going to do is just ink up the portion of the stamp that I want to use, and then I am going to stamp it that way. I do recommend using thin mounts where you can peel that off and use a thin mount. Another suggestion or another thing that you could do is basically cut these apart and have them individually just, permanently on this backing. So there's a couple different ways to do that. I did that technique with the crockery set of stamps. I just left all the stamps on their own backing and I just cut them apart. So you could definitely do that. I'm still up in the air about what I plan on doing with this. So I ink it up, I then lay it down, and the key here is just to make sure you hold it in place and then rub over all of the inked areas. Now I want to add a bit of something to the top, so I am just going to ink up a few of these stamps and just randomly stamp over the top. And you guys, I just think by adding a little bit of these images to this train case, it really pulled it together. The last thing I plan on doing, which I haven't done yet, I want to add a handle to it. I do need to get these proper clips from, I think they have them at Hobby Lobby. I'm going to take an old belt and I am going to attach the belt to that as a handle. I think it's going to look so good. For project 6, I am using this new mold. If you guys notice right off the bat, it is a lot smaller than most of the IOD molds. Plus, it's a lot thicker. It just has a bigger like 3D like imagery. So I knew right away I was going to use it on these trays. These trays actually have roses on them, and I thought this would be a great way to add more of like a 3D effect to it. So I am breaking out my cornstarch and I am putting cornstarch in the different molds that I want to use on here. And I'm using IOD air dry clay. I have it in a bag already, and key tip, if you do open up your air dry clay, put it in a Ziploc bag and then put a damp piece of paper towel in there. It will keep it definitely, it will help your air dry clay stay soft. Now I'm having Gravity help me with this. Because I used cornstarch and I flipped it over like this, I just bend the mold a bit and the clay just falls right out. There were a couple that were very thin. I did have a little bit more of a challenge getting those out, but then they came right out as well. So in the end, I decided I was going to use 3 out of all of these that I had molded, and I'm going to make them the same on both sides of the project. I started playing around with the different molds and placing them where I thought they would look good. I initially decided that I wanted to have one of the bigger roses with some of the leaves on each of the ends, because right on that corner there's a rose with different leaves, and I thought I'm going for like a 3D effect, so I thought that would be perfect. Then I realized that little one was an exact fit for the corner rose, and I thought, wow, I'll add a little dimension there. After that, I decided I wasn't going to use any of those, so I'm just going to cast the exact same 3 for the other side. Now that I have them all cast, I'm using Type Bond, and I am going to apply a bit of Type Bond on the back. I always start in the center, and then I take my finger and I feather it to the edges. The one thing you don't want is a lot of the Type Bond glue oozing out when you lay your piece down. So I always start with a little in the center and feather it to the edges, and I do that to all of them. After I have them all applied with the Type Bond, I just go around and I just make sure that everything is completely secure so that all the edges are down. I don't want to put a lot of pressure on any of the molds because I don't want to lose the shape and I don't want to lose any of that detail. So I do let this dry overnight because I don't want to paint it ahead of time, because again, I don't want to lose a lot of that detail. Now that it's dried overnight, I am going in with crinoline from DIY Paint. I am going to apply 1 even coat over the entire piece, let it dry, come back, apply a second coat, and then let that dry. And then I had to just touch up a few little areas, and then the project was ready to go on. Now I'm taking a damp rag and I am going to wet distress all the details. I am going to touch on all the raised surfaces of those beautiful leaves and all that detail there. I want to get the edges. I also want to get a bit of the handles. Even around that rose in the corner, there is a bit of rose petals. I want to get that detail. And then I'm going to let it dry. And then I'm going to come in and I want to seal it first. Then I'm going to bring a little bit of dark wax and bring out the details of those beautiful roses that we applied. I'm using Big Top from DIY. I'm going to apply one even coat to both the front and the back and then let it dry very thoroughly. And then we're going to come back and we are going to bring out all that detail that I talked about. Here is clear wax and here is the dark wax from DIY, and I try to use the same waxing brush. So I'm first going to go in and I'm only going to apply this to the roses. I'm going to add just a bit of the clear wax to each of the roses. And as I'm doing this, I realized there was still a little dark wax left in the waxing brush, and it's already kind of doing what I want it to do. I don't want a lot of dark wax. I just want enough to bring and, get into all that beautiful detail of the molds. So you can see how beautiful they truly are and make them stand out. I also add just a little bit of the wax to the platter itself where I had distressed it over those leaves. Now I'm going in with a paper towel and I'm wiping away any of the excess wax. And you guys can see it just looks so good. And if I want to add a little bit more dark wax here and there to bring out a little bit more detail, I do that. If at any point I would have too much dark wax in an area, I could add a little bit more clear wax to remove some of that dark wax. And you guys, I just think this looks so good. For project 7, I am using the new paint inlay called Delft Traditions Noir. And oh, you guys, there are so many beautiful images in here. And keep in mind, with a paint inlay, you can use it multiple times. So it is not just one and done. You can use it up to 3 times. And it just looks a little bit more distressed every time you use it. But check out all these images and think about all the possibilities. I was very excited for the full sheets as well. Anytime I'm out thrifting, I am always on the hunt for a good little hope chest or like these little cedar chests. And this one caught my eye because of all that brass on there. I am taking my little go-to razor blade and taking off the tags on the bottom. Then I'm going to wash it all up. I don't show that a lot on my projects, but I do wash everything before I paint it, especially if there's any, you want to make sure if there's any dust on there or any dirt, because these are all thrifted items. I contemplated for quite some time and finally settled on faded burlap as my go-to color to paint this. Now, keep in mind when you are using a paint inlay, you can either embed it in a clay style or a chalk style paint or a top coat. I initially thought, do I just want to use a top coat and apply it? but I thought that the cedar would take away from the paint inlay itself. So I'm applying one even coat of the faded burlap. I'm going to let it dry, and then when we come back and apply that second coat of paint, that is when we're going to install the paint inlay. I decided I wanted to add the paint inlay right in the center on the top, and I decided on this image. So I'm cutting it out, and after I get it cut out, I am also going to trim a bit of the paper on both sides. I just want to make sure that I get it right in the center or as close to the center as possible. And by removing some of that excess paper, it's going to be much easier for me to determine where to put it. After I do that, then I'm going to start applying the second coat of paint. And the key here is you want this second coat to be just a little bit thicker than the first coat. I start with doing both edges first, and then where I'm going to have the paint inlay in the center, I do that last. And after I apply the paint, then I'm going to take my misting bottle and I am going to mist the paint inlay and then apply it. I find the center of my project, lay it down, and the key here is to make sure you get as minimal wrinkles as possible. I also mist it one more time, take my finger and rub really well. I also take a damp rag and I blot it just to really embed that paint inlay in the wet paint. Now I let it dry. You can also use your heat gun to speed up that process. On both of the sides, I decide to add an additional paint inlay as well. And so I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm applying just a second coat of paint, a little bit thicker than the first. I am misting that paint inlay, laying it down, rubbing it with my finger, misting it again, blotting it, and then again, we're gonna let those dry. I do that to both sides, and after all three images or paint inlays are dry, then we're gonna remove them. To remove the paint inlay, all you do is spray it or mist it again with your misting bottle, dab away any of the excess water. Sometimes you need to mist it a couple times. You just want to make sure that paper backing is completely wet. I always start on one edge or one corner and then I start peeling back. And it is so satisfying, you guys, seeing that paint inlay embedded in your project. And each paint inlay is completely different and unique, and not any paint inlay is absolutely 100% perfect. So I would just encourage you to embrace the imperfections of your paint inlays because they are absolutely gorgeous just the way they turn out. After that, I grab my wet rag and I want to bring back some of those brass pieces that were on this hope chest or this little cedar chest. I'm sure some of you are like cringing that I painted over them, but I am bringing back some of the brass. I want to bring back the detail. And again, I just rub all over the different brass pieces. And then after I'm done with that, I distress the edges all over the piece, and then it's time to seal it. Now that it's completely dry, I am going in with Big Top and I am going to seal the entire piece. And I'm just applying one even coat over the entire piece. The key with the paint inlay, you guys, is many people have said that a paint inlay smears when they apply a sealer with a paintbrush. The tip that I am going to provide you is load up your paintbrush with your top coat and with a very light hand apply the top coat. I find that people that have a very heavy brush stroke, that's when it smears. So apply, like I said, load up the paintbrush, apply the top coat very lightly over the paint inlay, let it dry, and then you can go back in with your heavy hand if you want to apply a second coat of top coat. I have to mention I was pleasantly surprised when I went back in after the top coat had dried that it actually did a natural crackle. So tell me what you guys think about that in the comments. I hope you guys are as inspired as I was when I first saw that IOD release. So many possibilities of what you can create. I still have yet to pick a favorite. There are a few that I'm leaning towards, but honestly, you guys, it was an amazing release. And those IOD sisters, they hit it out of the ballpark every time. I do not know where they get all their creative inspiration, but I definitely need some. So, I hope you've enjoyed it. I can't wait to hear what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what your favorite IOD release item was, and tell me what you think about my thrift flips in today's video. We will see you guys in the next one. Bye.